All right, let's just get started. Maybe we can already go to the next slide. So as Adrian said, we're going to talk about SwiftUI and our experience with it so far as indie developers.
But also, considering that we knew that this would be a bit of a smaller session, we're trying to keep this part a bit briefer because I agree with Adrian that it's sometimes the most interesting part and the most meaty part is the one when you get into questions, and in general we're super open about anything. Like any questions, we are yet to encounter a question we're not comfortable answering. So that is both a challenge and also I'm curious if that ever happens. But like no matter what it is, if it's financials, download numbers, sales, framework questions, tech questions, our favorite line of code, our least favorite line of code. We do have both. But yeah, whatever it is, feel free to ask us. In the end, we're not don't have to be shy. We're very open and trying to answer everything we can.
Yeah.
Anyway, with that, let's get started.
Awesome. So I think first we're just gonna do some background. So Kai and I have been together for 10 years now. And we always sort of enjoyed working on projects together. So we're both software developers, and we've been doing iOS development for a while.
We actually became full-time iOS developers the night that Apple announced Swift. So we downloaded the first beta. And at the time, I was already working as a software developer, but more focused on kind of back-end stuff. And when Swift was announced, I went to my job and said, all right, I'm doing iOS development now, so we better find us some iOS projects, because I thought I was always really into Apple and the Apple ecosystem, and it seemed like the announcement of Swift seemed like the perfect opportunity to jump on it, because everyone was kind of new to everything again, so you didn't have as much there was still all the frameworks to make up on, but it felt like a really good entry point. So it's like, all right, this is my chance to have an excuse indefinitely not to use a Windows computer. So let's say I have to do iOS development because then I can use Mac for the rest of my career. So.
And I don't think you used a non-Mac since then.
Nope.
So it worked.
Yeah. And since then we've done like a whole bunch of different things within the Apple ecosystem, software development side of things. So we've worked at both small companies, like startups with 1, 2, 3, 5 people, to like huge billion-dollar companies where we were actually running the first the iOS team, then the mobile team, and then the kind of software development team together at one of the larger companies. So that was fun, and that kind of got us to kind of liking to work together and wanting to work on projects together. So with that, also more background, and to be completely honest, this is mostly me wanting to play with some animation. So bear with me.
I spent a lot of time on it.
So I'm actually originally from Europe, born in Berlin, but then kind of moving all over the place. So first I moved over to Cologne. After I finished high school, I moved up to Stockholm. Malin is from Stockholm, so we lived together there for a while.
Yeah, and I think, did you want to? And then we wanted to see something different and also study at the same time. So we ended up moving to the sort of Arctic Circle.
It was very, very cold. Yeah. It was technically just. I think it was 50 kilometers south of the Arctic Circle, but saying Arctic Circle sounds a lot better, so that's what we're going with. But it was really, really cold. So we thought, all right, we probably don't want to stay there, so we have to zoom out a bit. Our next journey was to go over to Australia, which was the polar opposite.
Because
quite literally.
We knew we didn't like it cold, right? So we gotta try the complete opposite. That seems normal.
Yeah, so we first lived in a little bit smaller city on the west coast of Australia, finished our university degree actually there. A lot of things around that as well that might be a talk for another day. Then when we finished that, we moved over to Sydney, one of Australia's largest cities, worked there for a while, and then at some point we decided, all right, Australia is probably not the place we want to stay forever. So for that, we actually have to zoom out even further for our next move. And then we flew over to to Vancouver, Canada.
Went the other direction, a bit more efficient. But
Yep.
the map didn't work that way.
So now we're located right there, just north, just on the right side of the border, and that's where we're happily right now and probably staying for quite some time.
Yeah.
So that was it. I just want to go through those animations. I thought it was fun. So story time.
Yeah. So like I said, we've been doing development for a while, and we recently we started doing freelancing as well. So now in Vancouver, we've been working with a few different projects, and we've been doing freelancing. And we always needed a way for us to do time tracking for that, and also to invoice for our time, because it's good. It's nice to be able to get paid as well. And then we ended up building an app for that, because we sort of tried out a lot of different apps, and I think, like Adrian mentioned, like time tracking is it's not a revolutionary type of app, but I think we noticed quite often that many of the apps were quite focused on iOS, but we wanted a good Mac app at that time, because we spend like 8 to 15 hours in front of our Macs. So we wanted a good app for that, and we thought, how hard can that be to build?
It's a typical dilemma where you're like, because a lot of those apps are either going, like our competition either goes towards like enterprise, or they're going towards like web apps rather than maintaining their Mac clients. And we're like, how hard can it be, right? What's there in a time tracking app? It's like some time it counts, and then you just multiply the time with your hourly rate, and then you have an invoice, right? How hard can it be? So we started our project called Orbit, which was set out to exactly do that. Built an macOS app first that is focused on time tracking, generating invoices, but we always had the goal, because realistically, I mean, I think most of our users will use the Mac app at some point, but realistically, you want to have access to it on multiple devices.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So this is, for reference, what it looks like, the suite of apps right now. On the very left is our Big Sur screenshot. By the way, Big Sur being released maybe it is already, sometime during this meetup, I think.
Yeah.
So that will be exciting. Then the iPad and our iPhone app.
Yeah.
And all of those are written pretty much exclusively in SwiftUI, which it was sometimes challenging, but overall
sometimes challenging. No, it was I think we had our ups and downs, but overall we enjoyed the experience enough on macOS, so we decided to continue with it on iOS. So I guess that says something, but we will get a bit more into the details about it as well. So yeah, like I mentioned, this was all built in SwiftUI, and the reason why we choose SwiftUI was because we just felt like we didn't know AppKit at that time. Like, again, a good opportunity to jump into a new platform might be with a new technology, because like I always like, and I think that's something I have to recommend people who want to get started, that if you want to learn something new, it's good to have a project in mind, because then you sort of see a direct outcome, and it's exciting that you can start using what you've been building with this new tool. So that's why we thought, okay, it might be a good combination to do that. And as Kai mentioned, we plan to do an iOS app later on as well. And the idea for us was not to like learn SwiftUI for the sake of reusability, but we knew that could be an added benefit. So we thought if we're able to gather this like pool of UI parts that we can potentially use for other apps, that would be an added benefit.
And realistically, we didn't know AppKit, and we kind of thought, all right, SwiftUI is new. Apple seems very invested in SwiftUI, right? If you look at any of the WWDC presentation, especially this year, but even last year, you kind of see what direction Apple seems to push. And we thought, all right, we started at zero anyways. Might as well start at zero of SwiftUI, kind of Apple's new shiny framework, rather than starting at zero at AppKit, which is, AppKit is fine. We actually started learning more and more AppKit as we went through this journey as a side effect. But we thought, all right, SwiftUI should be the focus. And realistically, we also thought learning more SwiftUI is probably gonna be beneficial for anything else we're doing, right? For freelance work, for any kind of other income sources. The chances of SwiftUI being something people are interested in are on average higher than on AppKit. I mean, there's a reason there are not as many good Mac apps for what we had in mind, right? So,
and I think another added benefit with that was that we were sort of looking forward to be able to like share our journey a bit as well. So like we have a podcast where we spoke a lot about our experience with SwiftUI, and we just thought that's not a good fun thing. Like as indie developers, it's nice to be able to sort of be part of that conversation and be able to share what we're doing. And so that was another fun part of it.
And then, as far as like why, because we're kind of new, right? At some point, we want to have the full suite of apps, because that was the promise of SwiftUI, right? The promise of SwiftUI is like, hey, you learn one framework and you can apply it everywhere. You don't have to do this context switching. And overall, I do think there's a lot of value in that. For example, for Orbit, we also have the backends completely written in Swift. So we use Vapor as a framework. And everything is in Swift, and we're building that in Xcode. And as much as you love or hate or somewhere in between Xcode, there is a lot of value if you have one tool that you can really master, rather than like knowing something about this text editor, a little bit about this language, and then a few other ones sprinkled in between. That's cool. And I think most people, like especially people that get started, they should kind of get a rounded idea, because I think to have a strong opinion, there's a lot of value in like knowing a whole bunch of languages, especially some that you might not like, right? It's a lot easier to figure out what you like and why you like it when you also have a reference of what you don't like and why you don't like it. So, but for us, we want to build an app, and we already knew a lot of languages, so we thought being able to use Xcode exclusively.
Overall, I think Swift is the language we've been enjoying using the most. So we thought if we can use that, both for backend development and for front-end or app development, that's a good choice. And then, so that sort of goes in line with the whole SwiftUI idea as well, that we sort of learn this one framework and then we're able to apply it everywhere.
And also, it felt like the Mac was a pretty good stress test for SwiftUI, because, as a little bit of a history lesson to that, SwiftUI was actually started as a project for the Apple Watch. So the initial idea was that this is kind of the framework to build Apple Watch apps. And then internally, Apple saw a lot of like the benefits of the frameworks and how much easier it made certain things. And people started realizing, hey, maybe this should be a framework we can use everywhere. So we also thought it was a bit of an interesting stress test to use the watch framework to build a Mac app, which is kind of the kind of extreme end of the range of what the framework was designed for. Yeah,
and we also felt like if it can work on the Mac, it can work anywhere else. Like the Mac seemed like the hardest part to get over for us, just because it's complex in different ways to iOS. Like you have things like multiple windows that you can display at the same time, and you have things like keyboard shortcuts and menu bar items and those type of things. So yeah, that's why we thought this is probably a good stress test. So if it works there, it works anywhere.
And also for like kind of our business reasons or our like trying to get some attention, we thought iOS is really crowded. macOS, especially the Mac App Store, it's not that crowded. So it was also, we thought it was a good opportunity actually to say, all right, if we build them anyways, might as well start with the Mac. And they're kind of have a higher chance that someone from Apple editorial, for example, sees it and is interested. If we're featured on the Mac App Store, realistically, we would be mentioned there for a lot longer because iOS is rotating like crazy. Well, macOS, and we might get to that later, we were actually then featured on the Mac App Store, and we were on the Mac App Store in all English-speaking countries for weeks on the front page of the App Store, which is not something that's easily achievable on the iOS App Store. And that also gets us into why native. This is partially us using every opportunity to say, hey, build native apps and don't build Electron apps. So yeah, it's a combination of the chances of being featured, of obviously way higher, building a nice native app, a whole bunch of features that we were looking for were explicitly native Mac app behaviors, like multiple windows and kind of it feeling native. We wanted like idle detection that we have in the app. So if you're going away from your Mac and you're coming back, we want to pop up, hey, looks like you've not been working for the last 3 hours. Do you want to remove that time? So we thought that was kind of, considering that was what we wanted, it seemed like an obvious fit. And also another benefit is, as far as resources go, native apps on average use way less memory and are a lot more efficient. And for something like our app that's realistically running all the time on your computer, right? For people that work, you might not interact with our app all the time, but it will be there. And if you're on a computer that doesn't have as much memory, it just seemed reasonable for us to have as one of our goals to be as memory footprint efficient as we can. And now our app has a few megs instead of a few hundred megs, which I mean, most people will probably not think this is the selling point, but it was just one of the goals that we set ourselves.
Another thing related to that is that we also don't have any third-party frameworks in the app, and that's partly because we don't want to like bloat the app too much and make it like unnecessarily big, but we also in general, I don't know if we're a bit crazy, but we like to always build things ourselves as much as we can, and at least like even if it's something that we haven't built before, we want to at least try building that once. And often we tend to sort of resort into trying to make everything our own code, because that's when we feel like it's controllable, and we want to be able to like be flexible with our code.
But also we tend to be people that want to adopt things very early on, right? So if like today, Big Sur is released, we don't want for all of our dependencies to be updated to support all the new Big Sur features and the design language. We want to be there on day one if we think we can be there on day one and not rely on someone else. And I mean, that's a benefit of us working closely together and kind of being indies. We decide that. And sometimes...
And of course, sometimes it can take a lot longer to do it that way, like building everything from scratch yourself. But therefore we get the added benefit that once we need to update something, we can do it quickly rather than having to wait for something to come.
And we only have ourselves to... and Apple's frameworks, but mostly only ourselves to blame. So if something is strange, it's probably us, and we have... which for us as a small team, right? We work very tightly together, usually quite literally tight because we're in this small room together. So there's a lot of back and forth on small things. So Malin's building things, I'm building things simultaneously. Which also is, by the way, a big benefit of SwiftUI over storyboards. I mean, I don't know how many of you have been through merge conflicts and storyboard files or XIPs. It is manageable, but it's definitely something that's not desirable. Well, merge conflict in SwiftUI, I don't know if we've had a single kind of nightmarish merge conflict yet, because it's code, and I mean you get the same if you write your layout in code, but it's SwiftUI kind of has a nice combination.
So you can write it in code, but you can also view it sort of like a storyboard, right? Like you can get that sort of it's even more than a storyboard, because you get the live updating view on the side as well. So that is sort of a nice way of working, that you have the code and you can get into very sort of detail by line, but you can also just edit it and see it visually, which I think is quite nice.
And another thing that happened to us this time that didn't happen in previous projects, that seems to kind of be linked to SwiftUI, is that we almost use SwiftUI as a prototyping tool as well. So we used to, in previous projects, we would always do our prototyping first and our design first in a different tool, and then go to the code. Not excessively, right? We're not having a design organization. We usually work by ourselves. But we would still usually go with Figma or Sketch or whatever your tool of choice is, and I think put together UI and then implement that. Well, SwiftUI.
And I think that's a lot, because I don't know how, I think everyone's been in that scenario where you lay something out programmatically and you have all your constraints perfectly set up, and then you're maybe I should move this button slightly down, or I should move it to the other side, and then you just have to break all your constraints and redo it. And that is just that's often why we ended up resorting into designing it with a different type of tool beforehand and then implementing it afterwards. But we actually found that with SwiftUI, because since Kai and I, we both do development and the design of the app, we found that we can actually sort of use it almost like a design tool. I mean, not exactly to the same flexibility, but we could prototype the UI we want with SwiftUI, and we could try things out very easily, just swap places of things. And that was something we thought just sort of almost to remove that step of adding a prototype beforehand, because we could just directly add it in code.
But also, as far as navigation goes, we sometimes build views or even flows. We weren't quite sure where we slot them in. We had a pretty good idea of what we want to build, but we weren't sure, should there be an onboarding before? Should there be like certain kind of steps in between? Do we want to flip certain things around? Like, do you first create like username and password and give details and those kind of things? So we sometimes even were in a situation where like, all right, one of us just builds the view, the other one is kind of going away and kind of figuring out where to do it. And then we just slot the views in because SwiftUI makes it really easy with a composable kind of structure of the framework. It's not a pain to move things around, to move entire flows around. Like you can go from all the way down in the hierarchy, right? One element, moving it from one side to the other of the screen, not a problem. Moving entire screen around, not a problem. Moving entire block of like kind of flows around, it's super trivial and quick. So we were a lot more flexible with our work that way, which SwiftUI really enabled. Like we have other issues with it, but for that, it's been incredibly helpful to do that and iterating quickly. So then we ended up actually shipping over it. So it's not just that we tried it out and we're like, all right, this is not working. Let's go home. Start a career in woodworking. It actually worked.
Yeah, and I think we've been very positive so far. I still just want to say a bit that we have had pain points as well. Like I think yes, SwiftUI has been super exciting, and like we decided to stick with it. But there were days when we were just thinking, we just want to throw our computers off the balcony, and we were just thinking, should we have started with AppKit instead? So I don't want to make it sound like everything is always like super exciting, but overall we had a good experience, and I think.
And it's also still new.
Yeah,
it is.
That's
most of the things that we have issues with right now are kind of specific things that are not working the way we think they should yet, or are just a bit flaky every now and then. But we definitely think the direction enables, especially like smaller teams or indies. Like for the Mac app, I think our kind of target was what do we have, like 2.5 months or so?
Yeah, I think about three months.
Yeah, to build that, and that was like building the entire backend, building the macOS app while learning a completely new framework, and doing all the marketing, like the website and the press kit and everything that's surrounding that for the team of 2, right? Yep. So I do think overall for us it was a net benefit, and that's not even getting into then starting the iOS app, which we're doing next, because for that we actually set ourselves an even tighter deadline, because now we're like, all right, we learned our things, right? So now we're confident. So let's see if we can get an entire nice iOS app done in 3 weeks, and that was partially because we wanted to set ourselves a kind of stricter deadline, but also because we knew iOS 14 was coming out and we want to be there for as close to day one as possible.
Yeah. So this was sort of when we thought we can also stress
and for reference, this is what the iOS app looks like. Yeah. So we have widgets and custom graphs and also table views.
Yeah. And yeah, I think when we were setting out to make this iOS app, we thought, okay, cool. Now we can at least have those sort of UI parts that we could potentially reuse and see how they end up translating to iOS. So if you look at this view, like the middle screen with the graphs, that is actually something we could directly reuse. So that was a benefit we saw with SwiftUI. Since we already had a view there, and since everything was very componentized, like if you look at this view, the graph is like an independent view, and it's built from multiple views. And in general, that's how you tend to do it with SwiftUI. You just separate everything as much as possible, and that adds you that flexibility. And
that's kind of what Malin referred to earlier. We didn't build things to be like, this needs to work everywhere, because in general, we do strongly believe that those are different platforms, right? You would not want to use a macOS app as is on your iPhone, and you probably wouldn't, I mean, Apple seems to disagree now, but on average, you probably don't want to use an iOS app as is without any changes on your Mac. At least not if you're aiming for kind of like a very native experience on the platform. But having like an assortment of components made it really easy to be like, those bars we're having, there's no point in building them again. We already have bars, and bars will look the same on all platforms. While everything around it, right, the tab bar and kind of the way we have the cards and the pickers and all of that is different because different platforms, different space constraints, but smaller components, might as well use them again rather than building them again in a slightly different framework.
Yes. Yeah. So then we like I mentioned, when we're setting out to build iOS and iPad app, we had 3 weeks, and we decided to also use some of the new things that Apple introduced at WWDC. And like we saw some, like there was some like really fun things coming there. Like you could actually start building an app with SwiftUI from scratch. You could just like have the entire life cycle handled by SwiftUI. So if you haven't, some of our things already still support like the old version, so we still support Catalina. But it was nice to build iOS and iPadOS app for iOS 14 only, and that's something I recommend in general. If you can stick, even if SwiftUI is available for earlier versions of iOS and macOS, I'd strongly sort of suggest to try to stick to the latest version, just because there were significant changes being introduced this year at WWDC, and it's just. You can sort of like like conditionally apply different logic for the different platforms and for the different OSs, but that gets a bit messy in your code and a bit less readable. So I recommend that.
I think those were some of the biggest challenges for us actually, to make, especially a Mac app, because Apple did a lot of improvements to the Mac app, but they kind of interfered with some of the things that we built ourselves as AppKit wrappers in the Catalina build, and they wouldn't work. For example, on a Mac, on average, if you have like a kind of split view controller and you have a list and then you show the detail on the right side, if you double click the list item, you would want to pop it up into a separate window. And SwiftUI didn't support that in the first year of the framework.
And this was one of the pain points I mentioned, that like at that point we ended up bridging over to AppKit just because there wasn't another way to do it in SwiftUI. But yeah, now that's actually something that's available directly from SwiftUI. So if you want to have that type of behavior and you're able to just support Big Sur, I'd recommend it, just because having both of those implementation, one different ones for Catalina and one different for Big Sur, is just a bit messier, I guess. Just like code-wise, it gets a bit...
because they're different levels, right? So using AppKit views, not a problem at all, right? You just put it in your hosting view controller or into your hosting view, similar to if you want to show UIKit view. So if you have a SwiftUI app and you have the window you want to add something, you can just essentially wrap an existing UIKit view that you have, or a view you want to build, because you can't do it, you can't express what you want to build in SwiftUI. And that's fairly trivial, and Apple has a good system for that, and you can do that, and it's all supported and works nicely. The flip side is when you're trying to fight the system, which is like the double click thing. It's like Apple has their way that didn't work the way we wanted it to. Or it didn't work at all in Catalina, and then in Big Sur there were some differences in what we wanted to present what Apple does by default, and that's kind of tricky. It's not the end of the world, but it's definitely challenging sometimes when Apple's defaults, and that's kind of what comes with this kind of declarative UI framework, right? You're saying kind of what you want, and then Apple interprets it in a way, and if that way isn't what you had in mind, now you're like, what do I do? Do I give up, or do I fight the system? And sometimes we decided to fight the system.
Yeah.
So that kind of gets us to our Big Sur efforts. It was, in the end, it was fine. I mean, I think, again...
just to round up the iOS part, we were, and I just want to mention that Kai, you were talking about setting yourself a 3-week deadline, and we did end up shipping the iOS app in 4 weeks. So we were off by 1, but that's okay. And I think we
are you a developer if you're not off by 1?
But that also includes things like adding things like widgets and stuff like that. So it was a bit more than just making an iOS equivalent of the of the Mac app. But yeah, we were quite happy.
Also, a lot of screenshots for the press kit. And turns out we had a typo in one of our screenshots, so we had to retake an entire array of press kit shots, which was not as much fun as you would think.
But yeah, so with that, we were able to actually not we were able to reuse some of our UI, which was awesome. Like where we felt like it made sense to reuse it, like for the dashboard that I showed you earlier, we decided to reuse it. But then there are certain things that we thought didn't feel native on iOS. So for example, the time entry list, if you saw it before, the colorful one on iOS, that one is a lot more like colorful and iOS-y on iOS, whereas on macOS it's a bit cleaner, it's a bit lighter and like very bright in colors, or light in colors. I should have had an example image here, that would have been helpful, but yeah, you can just imagine, we saw it as like two different platforms. So to that, but in that scenario, we felt like the learnings that we had from using SwiftUI on macOS still applied, because it's still the same tool. We could still build things in the same way, even if we ended up building certain components that were specific for iOS versus macOS. Like we were still able to use the same learnings as we had from before. And another added benefit was that we were able to continue using all of our data logic and all of our models, all of our app logic, our business logic as well. So like that,
I think we used 100%. Yeah,
replacement.
100%. Not replacement, right? We added a new target.
Reuse.
Yeah. So we added another target to our project, and we just used 100% of that, like the entire network layer, right? Why? Yeah. No reason to rewrite it. The entire data flow stuff, like everything with SwiftUI, and we're using Combine in places. All of that was already there, and we didn't see a reason of changing that. And you just attach different views to the source of truth data store, and your UI updates the same way. And it was very comforting too during development to have certain flows already there. Like for example, we did that for login. We didn't quite know what login should look like on iOS, so we actually just used the macOS one. It looked horrific. You wouldn't want to ship that, but it worked, right? So you could actually log into your app. So we didn't have to do any stubbing. We didn't have to work around the login system or build it kind of scrappy. We could just use the macOS one just so we can actually log in and then use the app and build the rest of the app without having to go through that process first. And then when we kind of built more of the app and we had more of an idea, again, because we used SwiftUI in the development process as part of the prototyping and design, we had a better idea of what we wanted the login and kind of subscription screen and those kind of things to look like. So that again helped us, not because we wanted to reuse those views and actually ship it, but because we didn't have to build it to even get started. Which made it very quick. And then Big Sur available today. And our update is available today as well. And that was, again, we set ourselves a fairly tight deadline. I think we gave ourselves a good week.
We spent a week on it, but that was partly, that's not the first time we looked at Big Sur. Like as soon as Apple announced Big Sur, I think we installed it, probably a week later, we installed it on a separate computer just so that we could try it out. Because that's realistically when we wanted to start looking at updating our app for Big Sur.
And we also want to make sure it runs on Apple Silicon, so we made sure that all works as well.
Yeah. But we noticed quite quickly that there were still things that were not done for SwiftUI at Big Sur. So in the beginning, when Big Sur came out, there were certain things that were obviously broken with SwiftUI, and we noticed that was definitely we felt like that was something Apple was aware of, and we knew that would be improved. So we decided to actually hold on with waiting a bit with finishing up our Big Sur changes, because we noticed that there were things that didn't work, and Apple seemed aware of it. So it didn't make sense for us to try to fix those things that Apple are fixing underneath anyways, because if they, like we mentioned before, SwiftUI has been sort of quickly evolving. So it's noticeable that it's a new framework, and like every new Big Sur update and Big Sur beta, we saw new things coming out. So we knew that Apple was working on it. So that's why we decided to hold off a bit.
So what we're really saying is Big Sur was pretty rough for a long time, until about a week before the release, in which we thought, all right, we gotta get that update done now. So that's kind of when we're like, all right.
But we saw things too. Like for example, I think in the beginning of Big Sur, some of the views just got collapsed.
Yeah. There were a lot of issues in the early betas with the layout system and with lists, and there were a whole bunch of issues. Towards the kind of end of the beta, it got better, and then I think when the first release kind of came out, we're like, all right, this is the target we have to aim for. So no matter how much things collapsed, luckily they didn't anymore, or how much things are weird, we knew this was our target, right? And then in the end, there's no choice. We knew we got to work towards that goal now, and
So I think in general, like if you try to use SwiftUI and you know that Apple is making changes, and I think it's important to stay in the loop and see what is changing and sort of see what is evolving to understand if things will be changed, or understand if you have to make a lot of changes. And I think that's something you have to be aware of when you adopt a new framework, that things will change quite rapidly, and you have to be prepared to like spend the time to like address those things if things change, that things aren't working like you expect them to anymore. So that's something I just want to mention, that like you might want to be on beta for a bit in order to recognize those things as well. But we were, like I said, able to ship the Big Sur build today, so that's awesome. And I think we managed to do something. It looks pretty neat now, but like Big Sur is okay. So some takeaways. I think I already wrapped that up. Like things are changing very rapidly. I think adopting SwiftUI has been super fun for us, but it's also been sometimes challenging. Like I think we just. But overall, we've seen the benefits, like things like building forms, for example, is like super fast. Building custom UIs like our dashboard, that was something that was really fast with SwiftUI as well. But then there are things that might not. And
also just to attach numbers to those. So we thought the dashboard, like because we have multiple things there, right? We have a bar graph, bar charts, a whole bunch of things that are live updating. If you have something running, like doing some calculations for those kind of things. And graphing them over days, being able to select bar charts to get more details and kind of highlight them and kind of zoom them in slightly and those kind of things. And we thought that might take a couple of weeks, but it actually ended up taking a couple of days. And then other things which was seemingly simple, like starting a new time entry where we have like you select your client, your project and what kind of work it is. We're like, that should take like maybe a day, right? Yeah. And that actually took way longer because there were so many weird kind of edge cases that the declarative nature of SwiftUI was actually kind of interestingly challenging to work around, because we want to remember the last client and the last section you have. So we want to also not load all the data in front. So when you change your client, we want to dynamically load all your projects only for that client. And then when that network request comes back, we store it into like a data store, but then we want to actually select the last client that you've picked for that the last project for the client you picked. And those things are fairly trivial in UIKit, but we're, at least in the early stages when we weren't as familiar, quite tricky in SwiftUI. And they're still quite tricky just because it's more SwiftUI in general. You kind of give it data and it displays it, while doing kind of things dynamically based on those kind of factors was a bit more tricky to get just right. And so that ended up taking 2 times as long or 3 times as long as we thought. And we had to go back a few times because there were like weird edge cases we had to handle. So I think that was something we learned a lot, where it's like, all right, estimating time for this is really, really hard. Because sometimes it is, you're just flying and you're like, this is amazing. Why would anyone ever touch UIKit again? And other days you're like, why did I have to ruin my life? No, but I do think there is something to that. Like sometimes it's just, especially like if you know another tool, like if you know if you know UIKit or AppKit, it can be frustrating to like stick with SwiftUI. But I think if you do have the opportunity to like spend time to experiment with it, you will also notice where those pitfalls are, and you will know what will take longer than expected. And I also think those are things that Apple hopefully is going to improve as well. Things that I think at the moment you have things sort of like things that seem really easy are quite trivial and end up going quite fast to make, and things that seem very complex end up going quick as well. So should you use SwiftUI for all of your future projects? Well, kind of depends. I think, that's kind of the standard answer to almost any question, right? but it really depends on your project. Like if you already have a complete app that is using a UI kit, throwing all of that away to rewrite in SwiftUI will not benefit you in any way, right? That's just if you're up for it, cool. You found yourself a new hobby, but it's not gonna get you to a better product quicker. But there's also like SwiftUI is a great tool to work with other tools you already know as well. So if there is like a stupid settings screen you don't want to build again with like a lot of weird constraints in a table, and you're like, this is so boring and tedious, and you don't have to support iOS 12, for example, it's a great chance to say, all right, let's use it here, because those kind of things, super trivial to build in SwiftUI. You probably won't run into any limitations of the framework, because it's not supposed to be, if your main selling point of your app is your settings screen, I mean, maybe it's not. Maybe you should focus on something else. But most of us want some kind of settings screen, right? And often it's like just putting something together. And it's SwiftUI is really good for that. If there is a lot of user input where you're like having a lot of validation, like if you have like a form for sign up and you have to make sure that password is a certain length and they match, and the email address is valid but also not been used before but also follows a specific pattern. You have a whole bunch of fields that are required and optional. Those things, they're all fine. You can all do them all in UIKit, right? We've been doing that for a long time. And you can do all the things when you like, as you type, you evaluate everything, you show messages where appropriate. But SwiftUI just makes it super trivial. So it's also a good tool, even if you're not as crazy as we were. You're like, let's go in and see where it takes us. Just using SwiftUI where it makes sense as a tool for what it is really good at right now, and then realistically that will only expand. I think that's a really sensible approach. Yeah,
and I think you can also see it's sort of starting to evolve. Like it start to be quite not written on the wall, but you see from Apple that it feels like they push different approaches to building for and supporting multiple Apple platforms. And I think if you want to sort of try to start to experiment with that and start building something that you can potentially expand and make for other platforms as well, it's good to start learning SwiftUI at this point, because I think there is more documentation becoming available. It is still evolving, but I think especially things like forms, we haven't seen that many things that we're changing with that. So it's a good part to sort of start experimenting with.
And I mean, we see that, right? We see Apple clearly pushing people towards becoming developers for Apple's platform rather than for iOS and iPadOS, right? You see it in a lot of ways. Like Catalyst was one of those efforts. You already have an iOS app, you can bring it to Mac with a framework that kind of assists you on the way. Now even further with the Apple Silicon Macs that are coming out in 5 days. If you didn't opt out of it, your app will just run on those computers. I mean, there are obviously limitations, but you can see that Apple's very much pushing all the apps should be everywhere. And having tools because that for most people, this will probably be the baseline, right? If your app just runs on Apple Silicon, at some point you might be like, okay, I actually see a sizable chunk of people using it. Maybe I should put some more effort in making some things a bit more specific to the Mac and the Mac interface and those kind of things. And there are tools for that.
Yeah. And I think that's why we thought SwiftUI is the tool that we prefer using
for a brand new app. But it's like there's so many different ways. But I think it's important to be aware of that. Apple, at least right now, seems to push in that direction. And there are a lot of tools, and it's a good thing to think about. All right, which tools do I want to do this in the future? And SwiftUI is a really strong contender for that.
Yeah. So I think that's everything. But like I said, we're happy to answer any questions.
So much about keeping this super short.
We're happy to answer any questions. And if you have any questions after the session as well, you can reach us on Twitter as well. Those are. And another thing that I want to say and not forget, I know it's pandemic, difficult period for a lot of people, and we're selling
a product. So I just wanted to offer, if anyone is in a situation where they think something like Orbit could be useful for them, but they're currently financially a bit in a tougher situation than normal, please reach out to either me or Malin. We're happy to give away like a free licenses for everyone that's struggling but thinks it could actually help them with getting paid for anything. Like we're super happy to give free licenses to everyone that's in that situation. If you can afford it, please buy it. But if you cannot, we're very happy to send some free promo codes to people. So please reach out. Don't feel uncomfortable. It's totally fine. We've all been in tougher situations, and this is an exceptional situation that everyone is in, and we're very happy to help you out. And even if really don't feel uncomfortable about that. Cool. Yeah. I think that's all from us.
Yes.
Let's get into the question part and the chatting part.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was a great presentation and so much. It was packed, actually. I have to unpack it almost step by step.
Sometimes we might be going on for too long. Sorry about that.
No worries. That was great. So I want to ask a few questions before we open it up to everybody. Maybe there are 3 areas. So maybe the first area is the technical side, which is, of course, you talked about SwiftUI and how SwiftUI was used in the project and the challenges you faced. There was this catchphrase that Apple used when they presented SwiftUI, and it was better apps, less code. That was kind of the catchphrase. Do you think that holds in your experience?
Sorry, what was your question?
Do you think that holds? That's a true statement in your experience? Better apps, less code.
Like I am curious what they mean by better. It's a bit. I would like it to be a bit more defined. But I do think, like the way I see it, as I understand that statement, I would interpret it like it's about getting a lot of things without having to add a lot of extra code for it. So, for example. Like every time you use Apple's fonts, for example, you get accessibility fonts as well with it. Or when you do things like it's very easy if you write things with SwiftUI to like adopt your UI quite quickly to make it nice for different sizes. So,
but also in general accessibility, like if you use an image, by default, Apple kind of encourages you to use a label. So you also give it text, and if you have use a screen reader, that's becoming part of the information that is being presented to someone with a screen reader. So those kind of things, I definitely agree. But I'm more seeing it from a perspective of you have the app. Let's say you build an app that is actually multi-platform. Overall, your code will be less, right? If you're saying macOS, iPadOS, iOS, watchOS, tvOS, you'll without a doubt write less code than if you would build each one of them separately. And writing less code means fewer bugs, or if you have a bug, fixing it once rather than in all those different platforms. But also means you buy yourself more time to optimize each individual platform. So that's kind of more where I'm seeing it. I think it allows you to have more time to build more platform-specific things. But I don't think we're at a point yet where a SwiftUI app will inherently be better than you could build it in the native platform for that specific device that you're building for. Like, I don't think there's a SwiftUI app that could only work in SwiftUI right now. Like most of those things could be written in UIKit.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of saying it. Yeah.
Okay, great. So you also talked about the code reuse, and actually I thought it would be much more than what I understood, because I got like you guys developed the UIs differently, although reusing some individual elements, but not reusing the same code. So although from the talks, I would get that it's just a single code base with a couple of modifiers, and that would be it. Is that because you care a lot about the different experience for each platform, or do you think it's just not really viable to have a single code base for a couple of platforms, let's say macOS and iOS?
Yeah, I think it's a lot about wanting to have like an experience that feels special for the platform that you're on. And it's
kind of both, right?
Yeah.
It is. I mean, what we said so far, it is not even that we're not reusing a lot. I would still think we're almost at like a 70% of code that's shared, especially like the model layer and all of that data stuff, 100%, and then views on top of that. So maybe 50-ish% with modifiers. So it's not little, but it's definitely, it's just hard, right? Those devices are different enough, and even their kind of app philosophy is a bit different. Like if you look at iOS apps, on average, you have way more custom UI. Like it's because traditionally you own the entire screen, right? You are in this one app and you present it however you want. While on Mac, if you like think about kind of how your app lives on a Mac in comparison, you're only one of many windows to use as open, right? I look at you right now in Discord, but Discord is right next to Keynote and Finder and Affinity Designer and Things and Sub-Ether and all my other apps. And they all have, I mean, Discord is kind of an exception, but overall they kind of have very similar UI design languages and very a similar feel to them, and all of them use kind of keyboard shortcuts the same way. So there's a lot more value, I think, or there's a lot more importance, I think, on macOS to be consistent because you're right next to all the other ones. So you would be, if you think of it as an extreme, right? If your copy and paste keyboard command would be different by app, that would be a nightmare. You wouldn't enjoy using your Mac if it's like Control-C on some apps and Command-C in others. And I think the same applies to a lot of other parts related to the UI as well, where you're kind of expecting certain controls to be in a certain place. You can expect that if you hit Command, you get to your preference window or going to your app name and then preferences, right? You kind of just expect that. And me personally, every time I download a new app, I first go into preferences and see what I did there. And on iOS, there's no shortcut or kind of shorthand to go to settings, right? It depends on the app a lot because the app is kind of the one window that kind of presents itself in whatever way things fits best.
And that feels natural as well. Like some apps might have a settings button on top of the right, like in the right corner, or they might have a profile screen and
or they have it in a tab bar. And all of those feel native on iOS, but they're all very different. And I think that's why our app looks very different on macOS, just because we wanted something that we didn't want to stick out on macOS. We wanted to be a Mac app that you use to do the things we're offering that feels like just one of the other tools you're using to get your job done. While on iOS, I think we added a lot more color and a little more kind of custom-ish UI, just because it kind of expressed better what we wanted to express and made it like it's also like realistically on your phone. More users that we're having there are using the phone to kind of quickly look at their time entries, and having those kind of bold colors that we're using there makes it way quicker to glance and see, this is my purple project, this is my orange project. While on a Mac, you're more starting a timer, then you have it running for 6 hours straight. So it's like the UI we could probably reuse more if we wanted to, but we wanted something that kind of fulfills those requirements, and it is still not that much. Despite the code maybe not being shared, it's not as much extra work as you would think, because it's still all the other flows to get to that view are still the same. And even then you might present one view or the other based on the platform, but all the other things to get to that point are shared. So it still feels like trivial, right? I just changed this one view and you're like done in 20 minutes. Like if you get to that point where all you want to do is flip the UI based on the platform, it is the simplest task you can imagine.
And another thing is that I think there are, even though the apps look quite different on iOS and on macOS, there are parts, like because we componentized it so much and split things up into like smaller views, in some parts we might reuse the row and like that part because we felt like that works across both. But the way we lay that row out might be in like a different container view. So I think even if we added our own sort of things for some platform-specific things, overall, like that componentization that SwiftUI is sort of encouraging you to do really helped for that as well. So we were still able to reuse them in that way as well.
And it's also almost performance, from a performance perspective, all this kind of nesting of views and like having small views is almost free. Like all the things that Apple's then doing to optimize that, it's essentially free. So it's never a concern that you're like, oh, sometimes you have that in your IK when you're like, oh, I have a 2D hierarchy tree, and you're like, you might not want to have that in like a table view because you're like, I'm a bit worried about scrolling performance. Those kind of things Apple's very much optimized in SwiftUI. That there's a non-noticeable penalty for doing that, which is really good too. So it actually doesn't penalize you for being very very kind of plain and separating your UI code.
Yeah, very good. So also, you don't not only live on SwiftUI, which is a new technology, but you also lean very heavily on the release dates of the new OSs and such. And I always found when I did some work around that it needs double everything, right? You need double devices. You need one device with the beta, which you must keep updating all the time. I don't know if you also got the Apple Silicon prototype that they were shipping to interested parties. So it's quite a bit of overhead, right, to manage also the current version you are supporting and the new version you are developing for. And you already mentioned how rough the betas for Big Sur were. And maybe that's even more of a headache than SwiftUI itself. What do you think?
It also really doesn't help getting 24 hours notice. Yeah. I mean, that is definitely a challenge, but it's also a challenge we pick ourselves, right?
Yeah, and that's why. Sorry. Yeah, that's why I sort of suggest that if you start an app today, maybe like if you can avoid supporting earlier versions, that's helpful.
And it's more helpful with SwiftUI than any other framework you have on either platform. Like SwiftUI, I think, is the biggest gap between last year's state of the framework and this year's. Like if you can cut out that, you'll save yourself a lot of hassle. Yeah. I mean, obviously that's not always feasible.
Yeah, and I think it might be like, although there's pain points there, I'm quite happy to see that there have been so many improvements as well. So it's like, it's good and bad, right? Like we get more work because we have to support both, but the fact that Apple is rapidly changing those things really sort of empathizes the value that they put into this framework. So I think that's good.
But it's like, if you would have to imagine, you want to both. Like with Swift, we were kind of lucky, right? Or it was a better situation because we had to go through those kind of big migrations, but it wasn't that for older devices you had to leave your Swift 1 code around, and for newer devices you use Swift 2 code. That's kind of what it is sometimes in SwiftUI. Not for all parts, but there were chunks where we're like, this part is for, if available, iOS 14. This entire other chunk is for 13, and that would be quite a pain in Swift, right? If you had to keep those Swift 1 and Swift 2 or Swift 2 and Swift 3 code around, that would have been difficult. Yeah. So you have that, but it's also a challenge we picked ourselves. We didn't have to be ready for Big Sur today, but there are also a lot of benefits you get for some of that pain, right? The chances of, again, getting free promotion, right? Advertisement for a business is not inexpensive. Being ready on day one, it just increases chances of free promotion, which is nice. Sometimes that works, sometimes it isn't. It shouldn't be your only marketing plan. But if it does happen, that's very great. That's awesome. And I mean, for our like when we got featured on the Mac App Store, we had like, what was it, 7 million impressions in like a week or so. We couldn't have spent that much money. I mean, obviously, also keep in mind, we were on the front page of the Mac App Store, right? It wasn't that 7 million people actually went and downloaded our app. That was, we would sit in a way larger office by now, if that were the case. But it is just very difficult to compete with that kind of exposure power that Apple has on the App Store, which is and it is essentially free, right? If you're a good citizen of the platform and Apple likes what you're doing, and I mean, again, shouldn't be what you're aiming for. You should also have a product that's actually doing what you care about. But it's a really good opportunity if you plan to support Big Sur or whatever the next version is, Mountain Big Sur, and you can be there on day one. That worst case, you have your app ready for your users on day one. Best case scenario, you get free advertisement out of it from Apple, and being part of the excitement as well, right? It's also fun to be there on day one.
Definitely. So also now switching more to the business side, I think you guys are doing everything according to the Apple book. So I'm not surprised that they like you. I mean, I hear you talk, and it's everything I think the way Apple would wish every developer would work on their platform. So I see that Apple recognizes that, and there is a lot of press about how Apple deals with some developers, and they cancel single-sidedly some apps, and the app review process is so flaky, and maybe some of the developers are living more kind of in a contest with Apple, so kind of suffering Apple. And I think you kind of fold into that philosophy that they are promoting. So yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense for them to promote you, because you are actually, you know, promoting also their systems and their technologies. So I think that helps, right?
Yeah, I think there's a type of developer Apple relationship that can be a bit challenging, right? If you directly if you do something that's in the gray areas of the App Store, it is more challenging, right? Because Apple has to strike a balance between, if we allow this app, should we allow all the other ones? Why would we allow this one but not other ones? How narrow is the fine line, right? We're very clear on with our app, right? There's no one gonna say, you know what, time tracking apps, we should get rid of those. And we're also not doing anything kind of where we're reselling products, and where the margin or the percentage that Apple takes is cutting our profits into zero or negative, like for Spotify, right? Spotify, very different situation. Yeah. They're paying artists, they collect money, they have to pay royalties. Apple taking 30% of that might take their margins down to zero or negative values, which is obviously not great. We don't have any of those issues. We're not competing with Apple, and however you see that, we're not in any kind of weird gray areas. I think there are those kind of base things where it's like, for us, Apple disagreeing with our business model is very unlikely, right? Yeah. So we're kind of not even touching any of the areas that Apple usually struggles more with. At the same time as we're using all the new system things. So I feel like for us, it's pretty clearly more of a synergy, because Apple benefits from some of the things we're doing, I think. Because some people might like our app and use it on their platforms, right? And that's great, right? Apple wants, I think, as much criticism as they're getting, and some weird decisions they're making. On average, they want their customers to not dislike their platform, you know. So I think we're in a very good column for that to even occur.
Yeah, I agree. I also have a friend who's doing an indie app, and he does kind of flashcards with the Apple Pencil. And he's also been featured also because Apple Pencil is a niche. It's not so many apps. And he's using, the system like a good citizen. So I think Apple appreciates when people showcase their technologies in such a clean way, let's say, without getting into contendants about business models and sellings and cuts and all those things. So that's something to keep in mind. Also about the business.
We're also getting.
Go ahead.
We're also getting really good feedback from teams within Apple, like SwiftUI, for example. Like, we know that they're actually quite interested in what we're doing, because Mac apps on average are more niche, and I don't know if there's any kind of as full-fledged SwiftUI only with asterisks on the Mac as ours is. So
we also noticed that, like, when we file radars, they are being looked at, and they do appreciate putting effort into giving them a sample product, because this is new for them as well, right? Like, they know that they're still developing. They know the pitfalls and the shortcomings of their own framework. I think they're very much aware of it, but then them getting that feedback from developers is, I think, something they appreciate as well.
Okay. And also about the business part, you started off with the Mac app, which is unapologetically a Mac citizen, and I think there's been a decline in the last years of the quality of apps in the Mac, and so many Electron apps. So I think it was quite a bold movement, or maybe what do you think about that? Bold movement to say, I'm gonna do an apologetically first citizen of the Mac with this app, and people are gonna love it. Do you think that's kind of a naive approach, or do you think actually people really actually care and appreciate that kind of approach?
It is both naive. Realistically, we're also in a good situation where we do want to build things. Like always, our worst case scenario is worst case we build an app that we like. So we're like, we hope our goal was hopefully Orbit can like pay enough that it's kind of taking a good chunk of our freelance work that we have to do otherwise to survive. If that can take over more and more, that would be great. But the worst case scenario, we have an app we like, and we do freelance work still, right? So it's the worst case, it's an app that we actually use to get paid and do all the things that we build it for. But it's also hard. It's hard, right? We don't know the alternative universe question. Would we have sold more copies had we had an Electron app that's running on all platforms? Maybe. Would we have been as happy about it? Probably not.
Yeah. Like we want to make something. I mean, I'm not saying we couldn't have made an app with Electron that we wouldn't be proud of, but I think we knew that we really appreciate the native app on the platforms. So we thought that is something that is like a challenge worth pursuing for us because it's something we know.
Oops.
Can people hear us?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Did you also get kicked out?
I was kicked out. I don't know if I was disconnected or something, or...
Yeah, told us that we were away for too long, so I don't know. Anyway, but it's also, as we said before, right? Our app is not doing something.
Sorry, I was broken out. I was just trying to think about. But before we broke out, I just wanted to say that we wanted to make something, and I think we are quite happy about being on the other side of making the app for Mac because we feel happy to share what we've been doing now as well. And that was another better.
And we're always very, very involved with this community anyway. So we're running local meetups. We're hosting like a Apple-focused tech podcast. We're doing a lot of things within the community. We go to WWDC every year. There are a lot of things that we're doing within the app community. So it's also an obvious choice for us. But at the same time, there are a lot of other apps that kind of do what we're doing. We think we do some of them a lot nicer. But it's not that we had something that no one else has ever thought of. So we also thought, I mean, it's a weird state to be in, but we thought making a nice native Mac app that's kind of fully featured was kind of more of a niche than building something that's kind of there, but no one is kind of passionate about it. And we do have some users, right? Some users are passionate about it and say, hey, finally I can move away from Service X, and I'm super happy that I could finally find something where someone has the same values that I have. And some people that are like, it doesn't do all the things that product Y does, and we have some of that, and I mean, that's
expected as well. Like we prioritize certain things.
But it's also it's now for us like a starting point, right? We release all of this year. In a year from now, we'll add more features. There's nothing that kind of limits us from getting to those kind of things. But I think if we would want to go to other platforms, we use the same philosophy. Like if we would build a Windows app in the future, or an Android app, we would build the Windows app with like the native frameworks on that platform, and on Android we would use Kotlin and all the native things there, just because that's kind of what we're curious about and what we're interested in and what we're enjoying. And realistically, we spend so much time on it. Doing things we enjoy has such a value to us. That's sometimes maybe not financially necessarily the best decision, but overall it makes us a lot more happy to work on those things, and that's kind of part of the indie lifestyle, right? Doing the things you want, even if they're not necessarily turning into direct dollars. I mean, it's a balance, right? It's a balance. It doesn't mean we don't want dollars. Please give us dollars.
Okay, yeah, I think we could talk about another full session about that, but I want to make just one last question before opening up, and is that as a couple working together in the same project, What is the dynamic? How do, both of you can code and design, from what I could hear. How do you split the work, and do you ever disagree, or how do you manage that?
Do we ever agree?
Like we always. I think we always have different approaches to things, and we like that's quite good. Even if we both have similar skill sets, I think I don't know. Like we have favorite parts, like favorite things to build. Like for example, I think I enjoy graphical design a bit more than you do, or I enjoy I enjoy sketching stuff. And in general, I've been doing a lot of like art in the past, so like I like that part. But Kai has his own sort of opinions about it, so I think that works really well, and he also is able to do it. So like if he has a better idea, he can do that as well. But we are quite good at like recognizing who like it's basically whoever likes it the most. Like if I like making app logos or app icons, then that's something I'll do, and then I'll ask Kai and he will criticize it. And that's sort of the dynamic. I don't know if that's a dynamic, but
But it is. We're just super honest with each other, right? Even if I spend like 3 hours on designing something, Malin can look at it and be like, "Yeah, that's completely useless. Throw it away." We're very honest with those things, and we do have our specialties. It's not. I think we do have like if you look at a Venn diagram, I think we have a lot of overlap. But Malin's definitely going towards. More towards the design side, while I tend a little bit more towards the back-end side, and then we kind of have a very good overlap in the kind of building the app side.
Yeah.
But even there, just because we're both building the app equally, to like writing the code to equal extents, we're still disagreeing on like. It's also we were new to SwiftUI, right? So it wasn't necessarily disagreeing, but it was also valuable to explicitly not communicate for a few hours. So I have my approach, Malin has her approach, without it kind of merging into one yet, right? Because there was a lot of value in like, how would you do this? How would I do this? And then let's keep the better one. We actually did that in the beginning.
Another thing is like we're relatively competitive as well. So like another example is like if we do something design-wise and both of us want to, like none of us have a good idea, we might get started and both of us have these different approaches. And then we work in the same Figma document, for example, and then we just end up sort of stealing from each other. And then like that competitiveness of like making the better one, that's like that ends up with winning in the end. Like that is motivating to us, and like we do it in a supportive way. Like we sort of exchange ideas, and that's the same with coding as well. Like if we look at different approaches to doing something, we both go out and explore, and then we come together and we sit a meter away from each other. So it's not that much of a, like we don't have to call a meeting for it, but then we sort of just talk about those things that we learned, and we like, this is what I found being a problem with this approach. Maybe you have a different idea for how to solve that. And we tend to like exchange a lot of those ideas. And like we're happy to throw our stuff away as well if the other person has a better idea.
We're trying to not get too attached to it. If I see Malin's design is better, I pretend mine never existed. Why would I? What's the point of like holding on to it if we don't think it's better? But it's also about, I think there's a lot of value in you kind of doing our own things sometimes to get an idea of like, interesting how you implemented that particular data flow there, or interesting, I never thought about creating an animation in that particular way. And then kind of learning from each other, because there's also danger, right? When we're so close to each other and we're like mostly staying home at the moment with everything going on, right? There's a danger of kind of everything turning into too similar, too much of a kind of
think alike.
Yeah, one idea about everything. So we're also trying to explicitly be like, all right, let's both build this particular thing, like despite it seeming like a waste of time, let's both build this, not fully like we're building the whole feature like to 100%, but let's both build to 30 and see how far we get, and then kind of try to see which approach to go with.
Awesome. All right, thank you so much. I would like now to invite everyone on the session to just say hi and ask a few questions, or just start the exchange.
Hello, guys. I'm from a small food delivery company, and we started to create a SwiftUI app. It's a food delivery app, and we use a list in SwiftUI, and we have problem with this list because list it's not equality of UI table view with UI kit. Yeah, and what do you think about list and lazy scrolls and lazy with stack and H stack components in SwiftUI? I think it's not a finished company. What do you think about it?
So, multiple things to that. Depending on the issues, there is a lot of weird. Again, that's a problem with SwiftUI, right? It's a bit of a black box. So, you might see a performance issue and you don't know quite why. So, for example, in the latest few releases, even from 14.1 to 14.2, there were actually quite a lot of improvements to efficiency of lazy VStacks, for example. And you kind of have to test 14.0, 14.1, 14.2 because there are things magically behind the scenes that are changing, and you're like, I thought this was an issue. I had one branch that I had laying around for a while because it's we can't ship this, it's too inefficient. And I looked at it, I think a couple of weeks ago, and everything worked. I was like, wait, did I fix that? What happened? And it was just that Apple fixed it in a minor update since. And it wasn't important enough to them to put it in the release notes, so I didn't know. I just got back to it and it was magically fixed. Those things it's nice that they're fixed, but it's definitely a bit of a pain point because you don't know what to rely on and which, so I definitely see where you're coming from with those kind of things. We've not had a lot of issues. What kind of issues do you have? Is it performance issues or is it layout?
It's a performance issue and memory issue because in list, if we use state objects, something, we have a problem with reusable this state object because I have a lot of it's a volume memory. Yeah, in UI table view, we have reusable cell and we have a problem with.
Sorry.
Do you hear me? Yeah? Okay. Okay. In UIW, if we reuse cell, we don't have problem with out of memory because it's a reference objects. In SwiftUI, if we use some object with state, it's value types objects, and I don't understand why in list this value type and why Apple do this like this, and it's really strange for me because I have a problem with refresh controls, with paginating, and small problem with animation and fix state in list.
Yeah, those are exactly the issues that exist in SwiftUI at the moment. We don't really have a silver bullet approach to that either. Pagination, I think, is solvable, but you have. So what we're doing is we're kind of having an intermediate layer that kind of fetches data and then the list updates. And if you have proper IDs on the list, it is pretty efficient to do the inserts as you scroll, for example, especially now with iOS 14 when you actually can use the scroll reader, so you know where you are in the scroll. You can actually say, all right, when I'm at a certain point, I want to keep this off. It fetches and inserts, and we've not had any kind of performance issues there. Refresh controls, I mean, they seem slightly broken in iOS 14 in general. Even in UIKit apps, there's some weird jigginess happening every now and then. And then there's no SwiftUI native way to do that. So yeah, those are definitely issues.
We fixed this problem with introspectly, if you know what is it. It's,
yeah.
And it's fun.
We've done similar things too, especially with the Catalina build. We actually had to dive into some views ourselves as well to do certain things because there were just things that we considered broken that Apple seemed to think were the way they were supposed to do. So we actually overrode some functionality of NS table view of NS split view and some others to make them work the way we wanted them. So yeah, Introspect is similar to that, just that we knew we want to apply them for everything. So rather than doing it on each list, we kind of did it for globally for the app. Just some things like to make double click work, for example, or to not show all the scrollers. But yeah, those are definitely pain points. And it's hard, right? When you get into those situations, you're like, I don't know what happens behind the scene. And then you start to test a whole bunch of random things to see what happens. And I think, I really hope those things will get better. And I think there's also a tooling component to that, because I do think Xcode is not necessarily equipped to help you debug those issues as well. Because I think there's a lot of tooling where Apple could actually help us in the future to say, hey, it looks like the IDs on your items are like all changing all the time, and therefore we have to re-render the entire list all the time. Apple knows that in theory, the tooling is just not there yet. So I'm fairly confident that we'll get there. But in the meanwhile, those are exactly the kind of biggest pain points.
Okay, we will hope it's
Sorry, I much rather told you, hey, there's this one property and it fixes everything. But yeah, no, we've had the same issues and probably similar workarounds.
We will hope Apple fixes it in the future. All this problem. Okay, thank you.
Follow radar.
That's called feedback, right?
Yeah. Follow feedback.
I don't know if some people are dropping or they're just leaving.
Yeah, but it is definitely early, and you feel it. It's I think with Swift, I didn't feel it as much. It felt like,
I think what you noticed the times you noticed it the first time you used with like Swift 0, like there were some issues with Xcode, but after that the points when you noticed it mostly was on the transitions, I think.
Yeah, or the compiler being a bit confused every now and then. But yeah, SwiftUI feels still early, and
it is.
Yeah. And it is. I think it's important for each team to figure out, is that trade-off worth it? Because sometimes if you're like just laying out a whole bunch of stuff and it's super performance critical because you're trying to show like 10,000 menu items or 1,000 restaurants around you, maybe that SwiftUI is just not there yet for that. But if it is, there's a lot of benefits if you can get it into what you need it to be super, super productive. So it's and sometimes it's unfortunate, I think, or a bit problematic because you have to invest so much time to even figure out whether it's right or not. You're like, all right, it works, and you're like, just keep going, you keep going, and you're like, still works, and then you hit the roadblock, and you're like, oh no. And we build like an intuition now where we're like, ooh, this starts to feel like an issue that will be a pain.
We have a fun fact about SwiftUI. A first version, keyboard observing, good working, and when we update in SwiftUI 2, keyboard observing and keyboards in iOS app are broken. This is all. And we wait.
We actually don't have issues with. Are you listening to all the keyboard events like will show, will hide, and those kind of things?
Yes, some, and we connect with scrolls events.
Okay, because we've not had issues with the keyboard. We have had issues with the automatic safe area changing. In iOS 14 and with all the new SwiftUI stuff, your safe area is actually shrinking and growing, like shrinking when the keyboard is being presented and growing back. And we actually had problems with that when, because what happens, at least in 14.1, I don't know if that was fixed in 14.2, is that the entire view hierarchy gets those safe area changes. So even if you have, like, you're in a sheet that presents then something else, even your previous, like the views underneath get the same changes, even though you might have never designed that view to have a keyboard and therefore you didn't account for it. So we have a whole bunch of places where you can explicitly ignore the safe area, right? You can say ignore keyboard in all or bottom or whatever you want to do, So that actually fixed a whole bunch of issues related to like odd crashes that we had like during development, because views try to lay themselves out and then they try to refresh something in behind views. So we kind of get to a point where we just often ignore the keyboard save area changes on views that will never present a keyboard themselves, and that made especially lists and kind of scroll views behave a lot more reliably. Like if you have a keyboard in a scroll view, then you have to figure out how to deal with that yourself. But if it's a view that shouldn't actually have a keyboard but is still affected, that might be a good way to get around that.
Oh, thanks, guys.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to ask. Are you shipping the app? What state is it in?
Excuse me. Do you repeat, please?
Yeah. So, what state is the app in now? Have you shipped the app yet, or are you still working on it?
We're developing this app.
Yeah.
We have a team with 8 iOS developers, and 3 developers sometimes search problems with lists, scrolls, and other SwiftUI stuff.
Good luck with shipping it, I think.
Thank you.
It will feel good once you're through it, I think, because like then you have this sort of new tool, and yeah, I think it's, if you can stick with it, it's an exciting sort of journey to see SwiftUI evolve. Yeah.
But yeah, you definitely learn a lot more about SwiftUI's implementation than you would think.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of the promise. It's like, hey, it does a lot of things for you, but at least in the early days, we look at like the view debugger constantly to see, all right, what is Apple actually doing here?
Yeah.
Because like sometimes a list render differently from a list with a for each inside of it. We're like, oh, didn't realize that.
Yeah.
And then you can kind of start to make certain decisions based around your observations from like an earlier debug session.
Yeah. But there's a lot of sort of trial and error just to figure those things out and to see what the different implementations are. Yeah. Yeah, awesome.
Big Sur is out, by the way, now.
Big Sur is out?
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Oh, wow.
Are you planning on installing anyone?
Oh, excuse me?
Is anyone planning on installing Big Sur,
Updating.
Updates to Big Sur today?
I'm getting a new Mac
No,
soon,
no,
so
no.
I'll wait for that.
No. I still on.
Yeah.
I think I try to install Big Sur on another laptop because I'm afraid.
Cool.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
So, hey, yes, Fonseca, would you like to say something? Ask anything?
Sounds like a no.
Yeah. If you had anything else, Adrian, that you want to chat about?
Well, I could chat all day about these things. So, one of the things you were mentioning, that the team needs to decide if it makes sense to make the switch to SwiftUI or not. But there was a striking point that you mentioned, that it was basically very hard to estimate, right? It's hard to estimate. Some things were much faster than expected, and some things were so much more complicated. So I think that's a very tough call for any team, because usually it's the engineering team campaigning for these technologies to the rest of the company, and then there's the PO side and the business side, and they always want to know how long it's going to take, how when it's going to work, and they always want to support iOS 10 or 9 because for whatever reason there is one dormant user in that system, and I had a lot of trouble deprecating even 3 versions back. So I think that might play against that kind of innovation, right? What do you think?
Yeah. But it's part of the decisions that a team has to make, right? If that's environment, it will be crazy to try to push it because you're just gonna build it twice and SwiftUI once and UIKit another time, right? But at the same time, I think it's always good to find a little bit of it, even if it's a super simple view and you build it twice, just to get the experience of it. So when you're ready to adopt it, you're not starting at like absolute zero, but you're at least starting at like some understanding. And then I think that always is an important thing. Things you know you don't have to use, but you know when to use them when you're in that situation, right? So it's like, even if you do a bit of SwiftUI, you know you can't use it right now. And in a year from now, you still don't really see an urgent reason. But then there's this one kind of setup where it's like a whole bunch of kind of custom like charting or something, or like, hey, this is actually probably a really good use case, and we could probably save ourselves weeks of work to build this in SwiftUI. You know, that day will come at some point, and it will come for some people tomorrow and for some people in 3 years. But knowing those kind of strengths, I think has a lot of value, even if you're not like full on committed today.
Okay. Also, would you like to make some promotion about your podcast, which I think is a great source for all
Yeah, if you can't get enough of listening to us.
Guys, please share link your podcast then.
No, but we chat a lot about this, like SwiftUI, basically whatever this is. SwiftUI and our app, but also like Apple and development in general.
We always have fun prediction episodes. We had a prediction episode recently about the our Mac event. That was fun. I think we did pretty well. I think we predicted not everything, but overall, like we got most of the core points right, which I'm pretty happy about. But yeah, it's always fun. I enjoy that, and there are more and more people who seem to enjoy listening to our rambling about random things. So
would you like to paste the link on the general chat for everybody to have?
We can do that.
I think we're at episode 120 now.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been going on for a while. Because I think we decided that we wanted to have a regular schedule so we don't like fall out of it. And then we just kept on going. It's been fun.
Awesome. So is it a weekly podcast?
Yeah. So we make it every week. I think we missed 2 weeks so far for the last 2.5 years. We try to stick with that. Sometimes we have guests as well. We try different things. We wanted to have some episodes just to talk to other indie developers about their journeys. So we had them on as well. I think we're going to add some more of those episodes in December or January as well.
We kind of slowed down for a couple of weeks because there was too much going on. We were at a point where we sometimes recorded 2 episodes a week because we had Apple had, over the last 56 days, they had 3 special events. So we always did a prediction episode, then a prediction, evaluation results episode, and we had an indie episode. So we had, so much podcast recording that it kind of got out of hand. So we decided, all right, until Apple's done with all their special events, let's pause the indie things and then get back to it once all of that's done and we actually shipped our updates, because that was also an important thing to get our updates out, right? But we also had, Mustafa, I think he was at the last meetup
a few meetups ago.
And
say again, who was that?
Mustafa
was a couple of meetups ago, and that was great. He was talking about his indie app. And
so we have an episode with him and similar people that kind of have that make indie apps, because realistically we thought we don't really need to promote super large companies, right? And indies tend to struggle more with promoting themselves. So we thought it's a nice way to hear stories from people that go through similar things, but also a chance of people to kind of reach more people to tell about what kind of fun projects they're working on.
Awesome.
So that was a nice kind of setup.
Yeah.
And we're actually having our first, I don't know how that will go, but our first live show this month as well.
Oh, wow.
As part of an Australian conference called Everyworld, we are doing a live show one of the evenings. So it'll be really fun.
So they asked us to do the Thursday night
entertainment.
So we're doing a bit of a different thing. Usually it's audio only, but we'll do something with video and some audience interactions and a quiz and fun. That will be interesting too, because that's definitely a new experience.
Connecting with your Australian experience, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be fun. I'm speaking at that conference as well, so
Awesome.
it's nice to be able to continue being involved, even if we're not there anymore. Everything is online, so that works out very well.
There is
Malin actually applied for a bunch of conferences to speak at and got accepted at all of them. So now this month we recorded 3.
Yeah, I'm recording the last one today. Then I should be done for the rest of the year.
Oh wow!
So one of the one we're recording today is NS Spain.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Fun too.
Awesome. So I don't know if you've seen this video, but there is Craig Federighi was invited. I think it was at Stanford, and he gave a speech about his career and such. Yeah. And it was this map where he showed where he moved around, and he only moved around, a couple of places in California, and then you showed the whole map, and you had to keep zooming out and zooming out. So that was quite a contrast.
I didn't even think of that. Yeah. He did that as well.
So what you're saying is we're more qualified to be Senior Vice President of Software Engineering at Apple? That's what I'm
You could have a shot now that the Apple is at Vancouver. Who knows?
Yeah. If anyone is going to NS Spain as well, I think there's a sort of live Q&A session. So feel free to chat with me.
Yeah, it's fun. It's kind of cool to see the community making so much out of the situation. Like you're meeting up, but like overall people are really trying to reinvent what kind of meetups have to look like for a while, and kind of it is, as you said, right? It is a combination of like kind of it's not that nice that you can't meet people. We used to always go to coffee shops, and it was kind of nice, right? We go to independent coffee shops and chat about iOS development, and it kind of turned into a lot of very niche discussions because you're at different tables, right? And you kind of go very deep on very specific topics. Well, now kind of this online format is a bit harder, right? Because you see like 10 tiles or 20 tiles with people's faces, and one person's always talking. So they're like experience with like those kind of breakout rooms, but it's interesting, but it's nice good to see.
Yeah, people continue trying, and especially with conferences, I think it's nice that they're having them, and they're also accessible, which is one of the added benefits. But I am looking forward to meeting people in person again. I think will be nice.
I think we're all ready for this to be over, but we will have to wait a little bit more. Hopefully, not too long. So do you like more the format of Apple presentations now that is more like more concise and more focused and more spread?
Yeah.
I think for me it depends. For those special events, yes.
Yeah.
For WWDC, no. I did enjoy the videos for WWDC. Like the sessions were great.
And they're really helpful after the fact as well. Like they put so much work into them, so they're really good quality if you want to look back at them.
Being able to have variant slices is really nice. And also just knowing how long it is before you go there is nice. But I think WWDC was, at least to us, so much of a community event as well. And that's hard to replicate. I mean, again, community stepped up and figured out a lot of things of trying to fill in, but it's just different from like being with a lot of excited developers in the same city, right? And you just meet new people, and then you get dinner with them in the evenings, or standing in queues for coffee, because I don't know why people in San Jose are so excessively slow at making coffee. But it's all
nice
part of
to just bump into each other without the intentional meeting. Yeah, I'm missing that. But I think I really like how some of the session videos were able to be like very short at WWDC. So there were some talks that were like 10 minutes, and then those would probably not have been sessions at WWDC. Maybe they would either have not put them in there, or they would have combined them, and then you might miss that because you don't think that will be part of that session. Whereas now it's like you knew very much what each session would be about, and I think that was like a way for you to skim through it is there as well.
But for the special events, I think this is quite nice.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like Apple invited us to go there anyways, right? So we would watch it from home anyways. But now you get a way more produced video, and overall, I think I did enjoy the Mac one a lot. Like it just allows for a lot less slack time. You know, if this would have been an in-person event, we would have seen like a whole bunch of large companies demoing their tools for like 20 minutes. And that's sometimes cool, but I think just to get like an idea of this is our own M1 chip, and this is what the MacBook Pro looks like, the MacBook Air and the Mac Mini, and we're just blowing through things. I think that's I like that format a lot, and I think it's also fun to see, because Apple's flexing their muscles and their money with their production quality, right? It's like I used to work in the video space, like so I'm very tuned into like seeing all the kind of transitions they're using, and what is a real screen, which one was added in post, and how they're framing it, and how they kind of do their drone flights. So I'm kind of enjoying it from two aspects now. I mean, you don't really have to from a normal event, right? You have a camera and you just see people walking along a stage, which is fun, but it's not the same as like having the current shots where they're like flying into the pond in Apple Park and transitioning into the underground lab.
Cool.
Yes.
Yeah. So do you think there's a lot of chroma screen there, or is it more on site and just a couple of retouches?
I think it's mostly on site. I think it's also, Apple's very lucky that they have Apple Park and that it's ready now.
Yeah.
We had this situation like this pandemic like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, before Apple Park was done. You can't make those videos at Infinite Loop. I mean, Infinite Loop is very functional and it's kind of a decent place to work, but it wouldn't be this kind of, you wouldn't use it for drone shots.
It almost feels like a setup for the sake of filming it. Like it's something you want to show off.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, so it's Apple Park is, I mean, as a working environment, I can't really judge, but as far as a visual thing to look at, I don't think there's any office building that's even getting close to that, right? So it's the perfect environment. Apple could just pick a random location, say, this is where we're filming, and it will look stunning. This time we saw a Cafe Max, and it's just this kind of huge building with those pillars and those doors that open very slowly, but that are opening, and you can make those nice time lapse of them opening. I think it takes like tens of minutes or something if you actually do it in real life. But all of those shots are super beautiful and perfect for this kind of announcement, and so much space for drone flights, right? Infinite Loop wouldn't lend itself as much to fly drones, and you don't have this huge park, and so I do think it makes it. Apple was really lucky that they had such a nice set, like even the watch event, right? If you looked at all the
that would keep right.
I don't know why we keep on.
You were kicking again.
But if you look at the watch event, right, where they showed the gym that they were in, that's actually a gym at Apple Park, right? And it's beautiful because Apple has a good sense of design, and they put a lot of effort into making the buildings the best they could with what's close to infinite resources, right? So they do have all those things actually there. They didn't have to build them purposely.
I was super
really nice.
I was super impressed with the setup for the HomePod, and they had like a small home built up. And is that for real? Did they really build a home in there just for the video?
That's really cool.
Yeah, I do think they actually built that.
I think they could potentially use it for other things as well. Like, I don't know if you heard about the like tiles or like the trackers, the Apple tags. Like, I can imagine that being something you want to show off in a home, like where did I leave my car keys? So maybe they like leave that set for something else. And that's sort of what they show all the home devices in.
Yeah, but the videos are super high in production, so it's really, really impressive.
And I think they're actually getting better. Like, I think the first one, the WWDC one, was super impressive. And I think this one was, the Mac one was kind of the most polished in a way.
Yeah.
There were some rougher edges during the previous one because they were a bit more playing around with things like the zoom, right? Going from Tim Cook into the small home. Like those were definitely, it wasn't an actual small home. So they did a lot more in post. Well, this event was just a very practical, but therefore like pretty flawless. I don't think anything stuck out to me as like, it's like 99% there. But, so I think it was, it's fun. It's just also, it forces Apple to be creative in different ways. And I think that's usually healthy to be forced into new constraints and try to make the best out of it, especially if you have a team that's excited about the challenge, right? You can see in Apple's videos
that they had people that are like, we're gonna do something special.
Yeah.
And
they could just have filmed Tim Cook standing on a stage for an hour, but they don't want to do that, right? And that just shows that they want to experiment with things.
But also, you can see it's the amount of passion and care that goes into those presentations. They care, and it's in Apple's kind of culture inherently to care about those things, right? Presentations have always been a big part of their announcement. And you can see that, and I think that raised the bar again for everyone else. I think Apple kind of started setting the scene for the general, like Steve walking on stage and talking about products, right? That was not that common when Apple started doing that. The CEO would walk on stage and do a product announcement, but now you can see that everywhere, right? You see that not just in like immediate like consumer tech, but also you can see that in gaming, and you can even see that outside of tech now, where you have a lot more of that, and some companies do it better than others. But it's definitely that kind of that can pick up as a result of that, and it's also interesting to see now if others kind of aim for that level of quality for their pre-recorded stuff as well.
Awesome. Okay, so just to wrap up, maybe one last question. So you released now for Big Sur for iOS 14. Are you done yet with Orbit? Do you have a long roadmap ahead, or do you have some other projects in the pipeline?
No, I think we do definitely plan to spend another year on features, right?
Our immediate roadmap is about, I would say,
we have like a year of features planned, but then we're hoping that this will be the thing that we can continue working on full time as well. So we definitely have a lot of different ideas, and I think that's another few years as well. The next things that we're doing is I think we want to make some more customization for like invoicing and stuff like that. So it's nice to be back on our schedule. I think at the moment we've sort of been making sure that we're like preparing everything for Apple's schedule. So now we're gonna take some time to focus on the things that we've been wanting to add for a while.
But it was also like the iOS 14 release was a bit of a shocker, right? It's like Tim Cook standing there and it's like, iOS 14 is available tomorrow. You're like, tomorrow?
That was a low moment in the developers' relationship.
Yeah. But this time we're like, all right, they're gonna pull something strange on us again. So we were ready, like actually a few days before the event this time. So we're like, all right, let's submit this already.
Okay.
So we learned that. But we're also not done with stress testing SwiftUI and all the platforms, right? There's still some platforms that we haven't tackled yet. And
we're gonna move over to Watch now, and that's something I actually want, because we often take walks and talk at the same time, and now it's getting a bit colder, so I might be wearing gloves, and it would be nice to just be able to quickly start something on my watch rather than having to pick my phone up and those things.
And again, it's a different surface area to do some of those things, right? On the watch, we want to be a lot more suggestive. Like we might have big buttons that just start the timer for the projects that you tend to usually start. So you don't have to go in and say this client, this project. Okay. It's like, hey, the top three are suggestions, and then you can also create a brand new one where you go through all the steps. But we want to kind of build something that's, again, designed for the watch, where it's like quicker interactions. If you have a timer running, you want it to be glanceable. If you don't, you get it really quickly, because sometimes it happens, right? We have some lawyers, for example, using our app, and they have client calls that sometimes just come in out of nowhere, right? They're not necessarily always scheduled, and they want to be in a situation where they can just start it quickly. And what they have is, if they're not on their Mac, they're on the phone, they answer the phone call, and then they don't want to swipe around and tell the client, hold on, I'm just starting something, so they can actually build them. So it would be kind of nice to just have something that you can quickly tap on your watch to get started. So that's kind of one of the next ones. We even want to do tvOS, not because we think it's the most useful one, but that kind of completes our,
not to leave any platform untouched, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're like, hey, we can use all of our the dashboard and all the kind of graphs and those kind of things, and kind of show them and live updating. There are a lot of fun things that we kind of do for ourselves. But yes, I do agree with Malin. It's nice to be out of Apple's kind of schedule into our own and work on things that we actually want to. And it's also relaxing to be like, all right, we're now on a stable platform. That's where we want to go. When we started this early this year, this is where we wanted to be by this point in time, and we made it. So it's also kind of nice for us. It's like all the kind of milestones as far as the product goes, we hit most of them, and we're now at the place where we want to be, and now we can build upon that, and that is nice. But also, we might actually get more than 6 hours of sleep for once tonight, which would also be a nice change.
Okay. All right. So thank you so much, Malin, Kai. It was great having you here. It's been a lot of content. It's thank you for sharing it all with us.
Yeah.
And
thanks for having us. This is super fun. It's fun to catch up with people anyways, and it's nice to see people that care about what they're doing, care about
the community. And yeah, it's awesome. It's great to see that you're keeping this up.
Great.
And yeah, we're actually running our meetups here, like on Sunday morning for us. I don't know. That would probably be Sunday evening.
Here.
Yeah. So if you ever want to join one of our like coffee casual chat meetups, let me know. I can send a link through. And for anyone else, everyone's always invited to join from wherever they are.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I think we can be wrapping up the session now, not to take too much of your time, and you have still the morning ahead of you.
Yeah, we should probably get some coffee and something to eat. And yeah.
Okay.
Great chatting with you.
Great having you.
Great meeting
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks everyone for listening to us for so long as well.